All right, and we're back. It's been a little while, but since I did just graduate and now I have to decide what to do with the rest of my life, it's been pretty busy. And rather than making that hard decision, I figured I'd distract myself with making more videos. So here we are. I have stuff that expires at the end of this week, so maybe I'll make a lot of videos this week to sort of distract myself from hard decisions. But anyway, getting into it, this is sort of, I want to sort of preface this discussion by saying this is not going to be an intensely theoretically informed discussion. This is not going to be relying on a lot of citations or something like that. This is this is probably going to be more of what you might call a rant, but hopefully a well-informed one, even if not explicitly sort of citing papers. So basically, what I'm trying to say today is just there's a lot of problems in the quantum machine learning field, and when I say quantum machine learning, I mean the publishing sort of side, the research side of things. I'm not extensively familiar with industry, but I'll talk about that later. So the question that, and I think there's a number of problems with quantum machine learning. Now I'm not, some sort of QML nihilist. I don't think that it's a worthless field or anything. I just think there's a lot of problems that that are unresolved as of right now. And so the first problem I'm going to be talking about today is the problem of what to use quantum machine learning for. What is quantum machine learning good for? And so this is a simple but deceptively simple question. It's not just, is it good for classical or quantum data, which is still a matter that has not been entirely resolved. There have been some recent works, I can't even remember their names off the top of my head, but suggesting that the advantages for quantum or the advantages for classical data is pretty slim likelihoods, but it's by no means like an open and shut case. And even if someone provides theoretical bounds on classical quantum machine learning with classical data, it doesn't mean that it won't be at all useful or something. There's lots of interesting bounds about non-convex optimization, but here we are with deep neural networks. So yeah, but what I'm looking more to discuss is what specific sort of applications are we looking for with quantum machine, not just classical or quantum data, but like, are we looking to do condensed matter simulation? Are we looking to do computer vision techniques? There's a lot of different fields that you can do it with. So I'm gonna go to this next slide. These aren't super fancy slides or anything, and show something you'll see. You could open up any paper probably on QML on archive. You could probably open up some of my own papers and see this figure, and this figure is problematic. I could have copied this figure from a lot of different papers, but I didn't want to do that because I didn't want to like accuse anyone or attack anyone or do anything like that. So this is a general figure that you'll see. You'll see iterations on the bottom. You'll see some score. Maybe it's accuracy, maybe it's the negative loss, maybe it's reward, whatever, on the y-axis, and you'll see that the quantum is doing better than the classical. And that's that's a great graph, but that doesn't really tell us anything. And that's often the big figure results of QML papers, is this result right here, is something like this, or maybe sometimes it's tables rather than graphs, but the same idea. That, look, on this problem that we have, quantum machine learning performs better. But the problem is it usually doesn't. And so what do I mean by that? Well, two things. First is that the problem usually isn't that interesting, but we'll get into it in a second. And the second reason is that there's usually very little done with the classical side of things. And there's really no doubt that classical computing probably could outperform in many of these tasks, but there's almost no effort sort of put in. And there's these random, you'll see a lot of like weird comparisons where it'll be like, here's a QVC with a certain number of parameters, or here's a deep neural network with comparable number of parameters. Like that doesn't really tell us a lot. Not only has there been movement away from parameter numbers in classical machine learning to more, flops or compute cost as a meaningful metric of complexity, but also those parameters function so fundamentally different in classical models than they do in quantum models. Even in classical models, right? If you're comparing, if you're like, oh, I have 100 million parameter, dense neural network, MLP, that's not really an accurate comparison. Where, like, if you're saying, oh, convolutional layers are better, and this parameter count, well, obviously the parameters are going to be different. So a lot of problems with that. But now we'll get into more details of the problem. And this is how you can see, if you don't believe me, maybe you just say, we just don't have, there's lots of good beginning work. We just don't, the hardware just isn't there yet. But I think the hardware is there. Now there's a lot of problems with the Google supremacy experiment that I don't want to get into, namely the fact that it's not supremacy anymore. You can simulate those circuits with GPUs pretty easily, as it turns out, but we have it still scales exponentially. We have quantum computers of more than 100 qubits that have pretty decent noise levels. I've run experiments and stuff on the 127 qubit system that IBM has, and so we have these systems that are pretty, they're pretty good. That sure, there's noise, they're not perfect. The connectivity is maybe, it's the heavy hex pattern or whatever the company's, connectivity is, but that's a lot of information, right? I wrote that out. That's how many it is for a 127 qubit system, I think, or maybe there's 100 qubits, I don't remember. So this is a huge amount, right? This is more than double Google's original supremacy experiment, which scales exponentially. So this is 2 to the 50th times, better, which is huge. And yet it doesn't seem to have a ton of results. We haven't, I mean, I haven't seen any landmark papers or anything from any company with these larger systems. So there's a problem here, because it's not that we don't know how to use them. We can get pretty good results from them. But it's that we don't know what to do with them. So you can see this manifestation in a number of ways in papers. One of them is the graphs that I just, showed. Another is that the benchmarks are sort of random, right? You're doing a computer vision benchmark. You'll probably have CIFAR, what is it, 10, 100, 1,000, I don't remember what they are, ImageNet, all sorts of those things. You're doing reinforcement learning, you'll have the Atari benchmark or MuJoCo. You're doing, NLP. I don't actually know what the data sets NLP even are, but you have like things that reviewers or the community expects and are sort of canonically accepted. Whether or not that's good or not is another debate. But you could pull up any QML paper and you'll probably find a different benchmark. I've seen MNIST, the written data sets, Fashion MNIST, cat and dogs, reinforcement learning. I've seen Cartpole, Acrobot, Mountain Car. There's basic, I don't even remember the basic speech one. So, and keep in mind, most of them are also downsampled. So it's hard to make any comparison, right? If we're trying to have like a transformer moment where that's an architecture that sort of revolutionized classical machine learning, we don't even know, like, if someone says, oh, this achieves really good accuracy on MNIST, like that's such a meaningless statement, because we have no systematic comparison. So one, there's a highly citable paper idea right there, and two, you can see how it's taking this machine learning paper approach, but we don't get anything good out of it. So machine learning, right? You have your idea. Usually it's poorly theoretically derived, but it is what it is. And then you run it on a bunch of experiments, and then you get good results and you publish it. That's what you do. And so then you're like, okay, that's what the transformer paper did. So they have some weak theoretical background and then a bunch of experiments that show it works, and then bam, it's a super popular architecture. The problem is, or the difference is in classical machine learning, right? If your thing does super well on ImageNet, I care, like, yeah, I'm using this system because I care about image classification. So it's good at image classification. The problem is two things for quantum machine learning. One, it's never used on data sets that anybody would ever care about, so we don't know at all how it actually would work, right? So if I ran transformers, and you can do this on like MNIST, you can outperform it with other techniques. You can outperform a variety of contemporary, large scale accepted classical machine learning techniques on smaller systems or on smaller data sets with different systems. And that's not because they're necessarily better, it's just because of the certain problem set and scale. So applying quantum machine learning, like empirical approaches on tiny systems and saying this is our groundbreaking technique, it doesn't make sense because we have no guarantees that that scales at all well. Additionally, those tasks aren't usually what we would care about, probably because we don't know what we would care about. But I don't think anyone really thinks that classifying, shirts or classifying numbers is really what we're going to be doing quantum machine learning with. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think that's really a thought that people have. So it's, even if it does achieve better results, there's not really like how do we know it's going to carry over to any other data set? We don't. And so we don't really care about those results. So that's the fundamental difference, is that in ML, if you get good results, that's just what you want, right? You're running it on the data sets that you care about. But QML papers are never run on the data sets that you care about. Additionally, this is something just to note, there's not a lot of scale considerations. I mentioned that before, where it's like, okay, transformers don't do great on MNIST, but you can scale them up. Well, we have no idea how these QML systems scale. Even though we have unsimulatable sort of quantum computers, there's a lack there. Additionally, there's fundamental problems in the optimization of these. A lot of people say, oh, we're just going to do parameter shift, get the exact unbiased estimate of the gradient, bam. Well, you can do sort of a back of the envelope calculation of how that's going to scale, given superconducting qubits, which are, I think, one of the fastest hardwares, a lot faster than ions, but I don't know for certain if there's things faster in superconducting qubits. Look at their sample rates, do a back of the envelope calculation, and you'll see that it's going to take a long time for these things to be optimized. So much so that they're not that useful, if it takes an insane and an inordinate amount of time to optimize them using these parameter shift or even finite difference or something rules. And it's not like SPSA solves everything here, because that doesn't have great scaling past, like a couple hundred parameters. So there's a fundamental disconnect there between the people who are saying, oh, we just need great, logical qubits. Suppose we had 100 million, logical qubits. Well, you can't even optimize on those. That would take years to even do a single sort of like iteration, right, of quantum machine learning. So there's a disconnect there in the sense that there's no consideration of scale. And also, which is fine, you can say we don't have to worry about scaling because we're focused on now. But focused on now, no one has any ideas about, what these things are useful for. And so this has resulted in a very disjoint and disorganized field of publications that really doesn't have a ton of interesting results, if I'm being honest. Doing slightly better on MNIST than a pared down CNN or a flattened MLP, right? Like that's not an exceedingly interesting result. So I'm hopeful. Now I don't mean to come across as a complete nihilist. I'm not saying QML is gone, don't look at it anymore, but just, it's not, well, one, it's massively overhyped, but that's everything in quantum computing. But even internally within sort of the academic community, there's not an idea of what to do this on. And I don't know how to solve this. I think if you have an idea, you could run it on real hardware and you could sort of revolutionize the field, but there's no consistent agreement on at all what this is useful for. No, this isn't even a theoretical derivation. This is just, what are we going to do this for, right? We have more than 100 qubits. We could do, if if VQE was the way forward, if that's the solution to all of our QML problems, we could do VQE on more than 100 qubits, and like we could get the ground state energy of something that's completely intractable for classical computers. However, we haven't done that yet for reasons largely because if you try to do a huge hardware efficient ansatz on a 100 qubit system, you're not going to be able to optimize it because we haven't considered even that sort of level of scale. And so, this is just a highlight basically of a lot of problems and you can also see this in the sense that there's no real data sets for quantum machine learning. I saw someone I know actually, I think it was the same, they were at LANL the same summer that I was, put a paper out on data sets for quantum machine learning, but and that got, it's good. I'm not like saying that's bad or anything. I'm saying that's good, but it's not been, it's not that you see that in every paper now. And I think that isn't something that the community has sort of theoretically and empirically agreed on. So I'm hopeful that can be fixed, but I'm sort of just ranting. I see too many QML papers, and that's why you'll notice I haven't really, the last QML paper I put out, I'm pretty sure was, let me just check before I even say this, was the PMLR paper. Let me see. Yeah, the last pure QML paper I put out was the Planetary paper that was in Proceedings of Machine Learning Research that basically said, look, to scale this, it was a negative view on QML. So it's, this is something I've taken a lot into my own consideration, but yeah, I guess I'll just end it here. I could keep rambling on, but that's sort of something I hope other people maybe you disagree with, and you can vehemently oppose me and explain why. And I think this is something that our field has not really talked about, but needs to be talked about. Let's see.